We've got Francis Quinn joining us for the morning keynote. Let me tell you a couple things about Francis. As I said, I got to spend some time with him last night, and so I'm really excited to hear the talk. But a couple things. First of all, he got his PhD in physics from Trinity College in Dublin, so you should talk to him about that. And then interestingly enough, one of his early jobs was as a research fellow with the Japanese Ministry of International Trade and Industry, an interesting background. And then before joining Workiva, Francis worked at L'Oreal, originally as a researcher, but ultimately leading to running their global sustainability growth strategies. So he's also, by the way, a technologist. He's got nearly 30 patents that are ascribed to him, and an author. He's either written or contributed to 5 different books on sustainability and CSR. So please join me in welcoming Francis Quinn for our keynote this morning.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here to share some thoughts with you today. I want to thank Sanjoy and David for the invitation to address you. Very grateful, very honored, as I say. I was also delighted that the event is in Atlanta. I have to say I'm a big fan of Georgia Tech, especially the basketball team. And there's not just big data and big energy data that unites us. There's also the fact that the city of Savannah was the first ever city to organize the St. Patrick's Day parade. So there's more than just energy that unites us. I want to share some thoughts with you today about sustainability. And I want to share thoughts with you about what sustainability ultimately really means for companies. And if we could step back just a little bit in time, let's go back maybe about 10 or 15 years and think about your average chairman or CEO of a large American corporation and how that person might have described their CSR strategy or their sustainability strategy. And they probably would have used terms something like the following. They probably would have said that, you know, I provide good jobs, fair wages, decent working conditions and benefits, and I make contributions to local worthy causes, but first and foremost, my corporate responsibility is to provide quality goods and services. Now, I don't know if 10 or 15 years ago that was enough, but one thing that I can guarantee you today, that it is not enough. And the reason why is the emergence of what's called a stakeholder, who comes in very different shapes and sizes, can be directly or indirectly linked to your business, and they have a lot of questions that they want to ask you about how your business is being run today and what your business and your activities might look like in the future. They have questions like, who oversees what you guys do? Where does all the money go? Where do you get your raw materials from? Is your new product or service, is it safe? Is it ethical? Now, the leading companies have come to realize that they have a vested interest in acknowledging stakeholder queries. And these leading companies, therefore, see sustainability as having 2 very distinct but complementary aspects. Let me see if this is going to work. And they are risk management and new business opportunities. So let's take a look. If you want to consider risk management, a very good example, particularly in the United States, is when you look at the question of our dependence on fossil fuels. Now, the fact that this is a source that's in constantly diminishing leads naturally to the question of the sustainability of the oil and gas industry, ExxonMobil being Fortune 1. Not only does it lead to the question of the sustainability of that particular industry, but also every single downstream user. For example, almost the entire chemical industry, fertilizer industry, transport. But even beyond that, in a country where the average person drives over 13,500 miles per year, it leads to the question of the sustainability of the model that we have for our society. And that's why it becomes obviously so important then to develop renewable sources of energy so that things can go on. But in fact, as that source becomes more and more rarefied, what do you find? Well, you got to go looking for it in new places. You go to Alaska, deep sea offshore drilling, or you go to Antarctica, wherever that place might be. But that doesn't come without risk either. If you go to Alaska, for example, what do you have? Well, you have issues around environmental stewardship, human rights issues related to local populations. You also have some very serious geopolitical issues. For example, the Russian Federation that lays claim to half of 2/3 of the Arctic Circle. But of course, you're always going to find some folks who will tell you that the party will go on, and that the party will go on indefinitely, as long as society is willing to pay the price. Now, deep sea offshore drilling, as a physicist and somebody who is very fond of technology, I can tell you deep sea offshore drilling is cutting edge engineering. You drill a hole 5 miles into the ground, straight as a die, and then turn 90 degrees and keep going. It's fantastic technology. The only thing is that it's new. In fact, it's brand new. And what happens with brand new innovations? It takes time to work out the angles. And this is what happens sometimes when you don't have the angles properly worked out. So it leads not just to the question of looking for oil in these places, but also what's the technology choice that you use to go looking for them, which enters another new risk dimension. And no better example than that than fracking. In the case of fracking, to go after one precious resource, you have to drill right through another precious resource. Now, on the subject of water, local company Coca-Cola had all sorts of problems related to their use of water in India. Right? In this particular case, had their plant shut down for several months because of diminished water tables that locals claimed was their fault, rightly or wrongly. It doesn't actually matter. Now, in a water-scarce world, what you find is that these problems actually appear everywhere. They even appear in the state of Georgia. As everybody in this room knows, the state of Georgia is suing the state of Tennessee over the floodplain of the Tennessee River. And not only are Georgia and Tennessee at each other's throats over it, you also have simultaneously Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico all simultaneously suing each other for exactly the same thing. And don't for an instant think that it's just Indians giving out about bad Western companies. These are other Indians shutting down a Tata plant, car plant in this particular case, that was never built because they were unhappy about supply chain practices and land appropriation practices of that company. And you want an even better example? Why not have a Congolese warlord as a key component of your supply chain for your tantalum, without which you cannot possibly build a thin, smart, mobile device? What actually amazes me about conflict minerals is that it required people from the Senate, of all places, to actually stand up and say to industry, what in God's name are you guys doing? Have your supply chains become so extended, so complex, that you actually want to do business with these guys? You want to go in and announce to your CEO as Chief Procurement Officer that your tantalum supply chain is stable because the warlord has just got 30 new T-70 tanks from the Russians? No, not really. Right? So you'll find people like myself, as I say, who are very fond of technology, who'll say, don't worry, technology will solve the problem. It always has before, it always will. That presumes that the technology is acceptable to society, because the notion of innovation has been radically transformed in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, you introduced something that was new. That was enough for it to be acceptable. Today, simply being new, not only is it not enough, in fact, it can call into question a lot of people's values, and a lot of people react to it particularly badly. And the reason why that becomes important is that if you're a technology company and you sink $300 or $400 or $500 million into a technology, you want to be sure that when you actually hit the marketplace, that society is not going to reject your technology per se, never mind your product. And so you have to integrate the principles of sustainability into your approach to innovation. These, for example, are nanotechnology centers. In Spain, the one on the right, that was blown up. Nanotechnology research centers have been blown up in France, Spain, Malaysia, and Mexico to date. The town hall meetings in France, I was actually at this particular meeting, the town hall meetings in France to debate whether as a nation France should undertake nanotechnology research turned into fistfights and had to be abandoned eventually. So just because it's new doesn't mean that people are going to accept it. GMOs, again, as somebody who loves technology, genetically modified organisms are state-of-the-art technology. The only problem is there ain't nobody who wants them, because they fundamentally pose the question not of a technology per se, but they pose the question of who controls what we eat? Who controls what I give to my children? Fundamental societal question. And if you are not aligned to the principles of sustainability, you can sink a lot of money into these things and find yourself in complete limbo afterwards. So risk is the first dimension that's linked to sustainability. The second, business growth opportunities, for a very simple reason that all of you know. There are umpteen surveys and polls and studies that have been done that show that sustainability is a growing consumer expectation around the world, but even more so in the emerging markets, where most of the world's economic growth at present is concentrated. And what drives that? What we see what drives it is actually social pressure. This intergenerational dependence that you see that's quite common, particularly outside of Western civilizations. But when you ask folks in these countries about, do we need to rein in consumption? Maybe think more sustainably about the way we develop? Look at the countries that figure at the top of the list. These two alone are the homes to over 3 billion people. You get over 1/3 of the world's population right there who are not sure that its hell-bent Western model of extreme consumerism is the way forward. Because of the social pressure. This notion that you cannot just live and not think about the future and what future you're leaving for future generations. Now, Marina de Silva last Sunday got 21% of the vote. In the 2010 Brazilian presidential election, she got 19% of the vote. She is now a key player in Brazilian politics. Marina de Silva's platform is a pure sustainability platform for the development of that nation. It's not anecdotal anymore. And when you go and ask folks about the origins of the problem, most folks will tell you that companies are a big part of the problem. The good news is they'll also say, well, they're a big part of the solution. That in fact the solutions can't be found without them. Now, if you look at some of the companies that have embraced this, Unilever is usually one that comes to mind fairly rapidly. But ask yourself the question, why did Unilever embrace so enthusiastically sustainability? Very simple story. Post-year 2000, post-millennium, Unilever is literally falling apart. The company is going to go bust if they don't do something radical and do it quickly. Niall Fitzgerald was chairman at the time, also from Dublin, somebody who I know well. Sets the company on a course to do what? We're going to grow our business. Well, to grow our business, where do we need to go? We need to go to the emerging markets. If we want to go to the emerging markets, only one way to go there. It's on a sustainability platform because it speaks more to those people than it does to anybody else, which is exactly the road that he set the company on, was continued by Paul Mann, his predecessor, okay? And the turnaround of the company has been nothing short of spectacular. Let me show you. When you're talking about sustainability, here's one short paragraph, and it's not from a Greenpeace newsletter. It's from a crowd who write a magazine called Fortune. Hard-nosed businessmen. What do they say about Unilever and its sustainability program? Well, it says that Paul Mann's done very well for investors. In a sluggish global economy, revenues were up by 10.5%. Earnings grew by 5.5% since he's taken over. Sales are up by over 30%. Okay, Unilever generated, here we go, 55% of its revenues from the developing world. Today it's up to over 65%, okay? And at that time, stock is at an all-time high. It's grown about 75% in the last 4 years. That's a sustainability story. Because it's a company who is developing sustainably. Remember, if the company goes bust, there is no sustainable growth. So from all of that, having looked at risk and having looked at business growth opportunities linked to sustainability, you have 3 very simple lessons that you learn. The first one is that companies operate not only in markets, but in societies. In other words, you take any one of us, we wear different hats during the day. At some times during the day, we're an employee. At other times during the day, we're a consumer. And at other times during the day, we're a citizen, worried about our neighborhoods or our city or the future that we're living for our children. And we have different requirements and different demands at different times. But if you're a global company, what you very quickly realize is that you have about 3/4 of your workforce do not come from the native home country of that company, who don't necessarily share those same values. But they know everything about you. They're your employees. They have access to all of your databases. So, for example, if you're a GlaxoSmithKline in China, and you get a letter from the Chinese authorities saying that several of your employees have come to the Chinese authorities to complain about your marketing practices, who was the first that GSK had heard of this? They didn't know. These are employees asking, how is my company behaving in my home country? Guess where loyalty lies? Now, not only did GSK find their 3 most senior executives in jail because of this, they got an $800 million fine because of this, and also the Chinese are very seriously considering kicking them out of the country. It is their biggest growth market. And in fact, when you look at surveys of the gap between what my company says and the way we actually behave, once again, our friends in the emerging markets, they figure very prominently in this. So what's the second lesson? Is that your license to operate is vital, because without a license to operate, you don't make sales, you don't make revenue, you don't make profits, and you're out of business. And that license to operate, in many cases, hangs by the goodwill of the people who are in your neighborhood. Let's take a look at another Indian example. For retailers like Walmart, Target, Tesco, and all the others, El Dorado happens to be the Indian subcontinent. So Walmart applies for a license to open supermarkets in India. The license was granted and was withdrawn less than a week later. Protests up and down the country, again linked to supply chain practices. This was back in 2012. This was before 1,200 people were burnt alive at Rana Plaza in Bangladesh. Subsequent to that, there was charges made against Walmart that they tried to bribe officials. Make a long story short, Walmart are still not in India, neither are Tesco. So as Walmart looks to grow its business, which has saturated domestically, they find themselves in very tricky situations in India, China, Mexico, Brazil, Indonesia, struggling to grow their business. That license to operate is vital. There are many examples. I have loads of them here. You take a look at Repsol, big Spanish energy company. The Argentinians decided that they weren't paying their taxes properly. What did they do? They nationalized the company. Game over. Especially if you're an investor. Genetically modified organisms in the European Union. In 1/3 of the countries they're allowed, another 1/3 they're not allowed, and the other 1/3 are trying to decide. Complete limbo, which greatly hampers your growth. The third last thing, and this brings me much closer to home, is that all of this has another and third lesson for companies, in that companies have to start sharing their vision of what they're doing in terms of sustainability. It's a whole new paradigm, and the reason is very simple. When I was Chief Sustainability Officer at L'Oreal, 4 times a year I would go on road shows with our CFO. Beijing, Paris, London, and New York. Sit down with investors in one-to-ones, you do about 12, 14 of these in a day, and talk to these people about why they should put more money into your company. And that's what we did. Very interesting. What these people want to know, though, is not how did things go last year. They can read a 10K. What they want to know is what's around the corner. How long is the show going to go on? How long am I going to continue to get that investment? And what you essentially do is you got to show them that, well, yes, we're going to grow sustainably. What does that require? Well, it requires the sustainable consumption of my goods and services, which obviously requires some sort of sustainable form of innovation. In other words, a form of innovation that is acceptable to the people that you're going to be selling to. Now, there's all sorts of data out there. There's a huge meta-study was published only a couple of weeks ago that shows, no matter what way you look at it, almost irrespective of the metrics that you take, companies that are managed in sustainable ways are simply a better investment. Here you're looking at 12 years worth of data. The blue, the top 80 performers in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index against the Morgan Stanley Capital Index. Not only do they systematically and consistently outperform, the level of outperformance steadily grows year after year. They're simply a better investment. Just 2 weeks ago, ExxonMobil published a report with a very dramatic cover on it. As you can see, they put a lot of effort into it. And the reason why they put so much effort is that they want to send a message that they did not feel like writing this report. Of course they didn't. Because this report explains why, on their balance sheet, they have booked so many fracking wells, so much deep sea offshore, and so much Arctic Circle and Antarctic wells on their balance sheet. And in December of last year, a bunch of investors who hold a very considerable part of the equity in that company said, guys, you're booking all this stuff on the balance sheet, how are you going to manage the risk? and oblige them to write the report that they never felt like writing about how they're going to handle it. Because remember, at the end of the day, and this is the way that they look at it, and I'm sure David will confirm this, investors will look you straight in the eye and say, that's my money you're drilling these holes with, okay? I'm the one who's going to lose my shirt if Putin invades the Arctic Circle, or if Obama refuses to sign some piece of paper, or some bunch of Indians with an impronounceable name has you shut down overnight. It's my money. And these are very unilateral conversations, believe me. Apple, great company, has all sorts of problems linked with supply chain that we won't go into today. But their device, chocolate block full of nanotechnology. But guess what? The EPA has decided they're going to regulate all new uses of engineered nanoscale materials. Interesting. Pharmaceutical drugs. We have a report from the French government itself that says 60% of all the medicinal drugs sold in France serve no purpose whatsoever. Interesting. Especially when you look at all around the world, you see social welfare systems that are going bust, governments that are trying to reduce deficits. What does that mean in terms of innovation and innovative capacity for the pharmaceutical industry? And what does it mean for them as sustainable quality investments? So it's hardly surprising that you have a bunch of these folks around. These are the degrowth folks, folks who want to shrink down the world economy. Say, guys, that's enough. Enough is enough. Let's just keep the pie this size and let's work at it from here. Do not dismiss these people, because A, they're not a tiny minority. There's actually quite a lot of people who listen to them. B, they are very serious folks. They're actually supported by some of the world's foremost economists in what they say. And more importantly, it resonates with people. Right? Now, if you actually go and think about it, these people recommend shrinking the world economy by about 10%. And let me put that into perspective for you, okay? When the Greek economy was shrunk by 4%, we had over 25% of Greek children within 1 year going to school suffering from malnutrition. That was a 4% reduction in the middle of the European Union. These guys want to shrink the entire world economy by 10%, 10 to 15%. And as I say, supported with very logical arguments by some very serious economists, for example, like Tim Jackson, John Lord up in Toronto. And a lot of people listen to them. Never underestimate as well that in the background you have this. All sorts of shoddy goods being made all around the world. And the impact that it has on policymakers, decision makers, and just citizens like ourselves when we wear our citizens or our consumer hat is non-negligible. So what does it mean? It's hardly surprising that you've got a whole bunch of folks heading in this direction. Heading in the direction of a better life, better management of resources, looking for more sustainability. So what does that mean for companies then? Well, thank God we've had something that could only be described as a bit of an awakening in the country. I've seen it myself, lived it in the last 2 years. It's been growing before I arrived, thankfully. But what more and more companies are starting to realize is that we have got to start telling our story to our investors, to our employees, to our suppliers, to our customers, to our neighbors around our sites and facilities around the country, because they can complain to local politicians and have us shut down in a heartbeat. And as of December 2013, irrespective of what sector activity that you work in, if you consider yourself to be one of the 100 leading players globally in your industry, and you're not writing a report, then you're in the minority. So, these reports are complex documents. This is the space that Workiva thrives in. We'll talk about that a little bit later. What is in one of these sustainability reports? A well-written sustainability report is a snapshot of what that company is doing and where it's going. This is the last one, is that you have the entire spectrum of the activities of the company described even in the contents index. Developing and growing responsibilities, the business section, innovation section, production, consumption, right? Diversity, managing talent, and here's the relationships that you have with your stakeholders. All the business part in there. Okay. How many people writing reports then? If that's what a good, well-written report is, a snapshot, how many have been written? Last year, just over 7,000. Now, in April of this year, the European Union mandated obligatory sustainability reporting for all companies with more than 500 employees that are listed on European stock exchanges. That's 6,000 companies straight off the top. More importantly, the federal government here in the United States wrote to the European Union asking, oh, by the way, there are some American companies that are listed on European stock exchanges. Does your new rule apply to them? Miraculously, they got a reply back within 3 days. I don't think anybody's ever got a reply back within 3 days from the European Commission, but they got an answer back saying, of course you're concerned. So all 118 of the S&P 500 companies that currently don't publish a sustainability report, turns out they're all listed in Europe. And now, by law, if they wish to stay listed on European stock exchanges, will have to publish a sustainability report, not on their European activities, but on their global operations, because the risk that you have in your supply chain, for example, is global. It is not confined to the territory of the European Union. So even legislation in faraway Europe directly impacts what companies here domestically have to do. That is the nature of our interconnected world today. So if you look then at, here we have the 41 leading economies around the world. Here we have the number of, here we have in the top 100 companies in each one of those countries, the numbers of them that are writing sustainability reports. The United States is here. So of the top 100 companies in the country, over 80% of them write sustainability reports today. And I said to you earlier on, it doesn't matter what sector you're in. You can be in mining, oil and gas, transport, trade and retail. It doesn't matter. As of last year, every single sector is significantly above 50%. So if you're not writing one today, it then becomes a question. Well, how come you guys not writing a report? Either A, you're so badly organized you're not capable of writing a report, or B, there's something that you don't want to say in your report. Don't want to talk about Congolese warlords? Don't want to talk about fracking? Don't want to talk about supply chain issues, child labor? Don't want to talk about good governance, transparency? What is it that you don't actually want to talk about? That is not a conversation that you want to have. I would say it's not a conversation you want to have with anybody, but especially not with an investor, or especially not with valued employees or valued suppliers or business partners. Don't wait until somebody comes to see you before you start trying to cobble together this information, because it takes a long time, even if you're using a tool as wonderful as ours. That's a short plug for Workiva. Okay, there's another form of reporting that's out there that's also thankfully gaining a lot of traction. It's what's called an integrated report. In some companies, the word integrated report's a bit of a dirty word, so you might call it a combined report, you might call it a coupled report. What it essentially is that it's a document that highlights the activities and performance of the company from two complementary perspectives, from a financial perspective, but also from the sustainability perspective. And you see them both. How does the financial consideration, how do they affect the sustainability performance, and vice versa? Right? About 700 or so of those reports written in 2013. These numbers, they stopped gathering them around the month.
Thank you. If you've completed some of these cards, please hand them to one of the folks, and we'll bring up there. We have an opportunity to ask Francis a few questions. I've got a couple of them already, though.
Please.
One is, Francis, you talked about Unilever. Are there other examples of companies that have seen increasing revenues as a result of producing, going with sustainability initiatives?
Oh, loads. Let me see. Siemens. Is it 43, 45% of revenue from the company today comes from your sustainability product, your sustainable product lines? Pretty close. Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble's target last year was $50 billion from its sustainable product lines. They overshot that by, I think, about $2 billion, so they got about 52. General Electric. I think General Electric brought in something of the region of about 60 billion. I'd have to go and check my figures for that, but something like that. There are lots of examples. Even if you look at PepsiCo. Okay, I know not a word that we pronounce very often here in the city of Atlanta, yeah. But the folks at PepsiCo have been very quietly going about their business and sharing a lot of information with stakeholders, been building themselves a very strong reputation in the emerging markets, and are also, I know, doing very well there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question we have for you, Francis, is it talks about the partnership that Workiva announced with Urginet. And the question is just how is it that Urginet data is going to play a role in the Workiva CSR reporting application?
The way it's going to play a role, that's a long question. Let me see if I can find a soundbite answer for that. The short answer would be that imagine a scenario whereby somebody who's a senior manager at a large company, they've got a lot of facilities, and that they would have a methodology that would allow them in a completely automated, A to Z automated fashion, look at a given dashboard that would tell them what their entire energy operations and management scheme looks like. But that dashboard would not just be a static document, it would be a real-time document. And that it wouldn't just be a dashboard for him. At the same time as his dashboard was being in real time updated, it would also be building out his quarterly presentation to the board. It would be simultaneously populating his submission to the CDP, simultaneously preparing his DJSI submission for next year, his Bloomberg. It would also simultaneously be filling out the request for information that they'd received from Walmart that previous month. In fact, any number of documents linked to their sustainability data that was leveraging their energy data would be updated and built out without any human direct intervention. That's kind of the vision that we have, and I'll talk about it a little bit later in the flash session this afternoon.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And yes, it is ambitious, I agree, but you got to be ambitious in life.
Okay. This next question, sustainability is obviously a growth opportunity for business. How do small companies take advantage of all this? Good question.
Small companies can take advantage of it in many ways. Workiva has 1,000 employees. This year, we edited our second sustainability report. Why? Because we wanted to send a message to our employees. We value our employees, every last single one of them. Letting our employees know that there's only a small handful of companies in the whole country of our size that write sustainability reports, and we're amongst them, is important. It also goes to the buildings that we have, the way they're built, the way they're managed, state of the art. It also sends a very strong message to our community, to the governor of the state of Iowa, to the mayor of the town where we are, that we're serious about our business and we're in for the long haul. And that helps. Those are the kind of businesses that they want to see, that they want to support. It also sends a very clear message to our investors. Again, that we have a clear, modern vision of the workplace, a modern vision of how we intend to develop our innovations. So there's that whole dimension linked directly to your workspace. There's then the second dimension that if you want to be a partner with a L'Oreal, with a Coca-Cola, with a Hewlett-Packard or an Apple, then to have preferred supplier status, these documents are obligatory. These practices are obligatory. Because if something happens to you, let me give a very good example. Using a lot of Indian examples this morning, it's just for you, trust me. I'm in my office one day at L'Oreal. Get a knock on the door from security to say, oh, there's a television crew outside on the sidewalk, and they'd like to have a conversation with you. And I said, really? And what do they want to talk about? Oh, apparently they want to talk about child labor. I said, okay, all right, that's what we need. All right, so make a long story short, what happened is that you have pigments that are used in cosmetic products, particularly makeup. A lot of these pigments contain a natural substance called mica. Mica is mined in many places, including India. And in India, you have a lot of children who work in the mica mines. Now, no television company in their right mind wants to interview some chemical company that purifies mica or makes pigments that nobody's ever heard of. But they sure as hell want to talk to L'Oreal. Okay? Third largest advertiser in the world. You get a picture of some beautiful women on your news story. That's who everybody wants to talk to. Okay? So part of our supply chain practice for mica is zero tolerance policy. And it's not just for big pigment suppliers, it's for any supplier. So if you're a small company and you want a piece of a bigger pie, not having this kind of information and these kinds of practices becomes a serious liability because you become de facto a liability to the larger company.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. October, it's why they're a little bit short. Around 700 of them written last year. So what does all of that mean? Basically, if you want to get support from your CFO or your CEO for writing sustainability reports at your company, I don't think it's worth your while going in there and talking about moral imperatives. They will smile at you, answer your questions, ask very clever questions, but as soon as you're gone out the door, they will go straight back to work. That is what they're being paid to do. However, if you shape the case that you make for sustainability in the sense that how you're going to help that company to manage its risk, grow its business, establish, protect, maintain a license to operate, develop new innovative solutions that will be acceptable to your society and not money lost in R&D, and help promote the consumption of your goods for prolonged periods, then I think you will get their attention. It's then a question of sitting down, gathering your colleagues together, and start thinking about how you're going to tell your story, how you're going to show them how your company is driven to grow, but not to grow in any manner, to grow in a sustainable manner for the betterment of the employees, betterment of your company, and, if at all possible, benefit for society and the planet as a whole. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.